I'd been working in an office building downtown for years. The company ran an online news site, and I handled the web development side, mostly making sure articles were posted properly and that the website didn't crash. We usually had someone cover the overnight shift, but after the guy doing it quit, I was stuck taking over until they found a replacement. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just a quiet office and a few routine checks, right? But the silence at night in that empty building hit differently. No chatter, no lights, just me stuck in a giant space that felt more like a tomb than a workplace. One night, I was lucky enough to have a small update to work on, a simple new page for the site. It only kept me busy for about an hour. After that, boredom took over again. I grabbed some coffee and decided to walk around a bit. I'd never really explored the upper floors, so I figured I might as well see what was up there. I took the stairs to the top floor. Most of the lights were off, except for a single one in the hallway. I wandered down and peeked into a few rooms, but there wasn't much to see, just more empty offices and darkness. As I headed back toward the stairwell, I suddenly heard something from below. A sharp creak, like a door opening. The noise froze me. It was unmistakable, and I knew I was the only one in the building. My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Probably just pipes or old building sounds, I told myself. Back on the third floor, I headed toward my office when something stopped me. One of the doors to the side rooms was slightly open. I couldn't say for certain, but I was almost sure that door had been closed earlier. I stared at it for a moment. Something about it just felt wrong. I walked over and peeked in. The office inside looked like mine. Cubicles lined up, lights off, everything still and silent. Only a sliver of light from the hallway cut across the floor. "Hello?" I called out. No answer, just my own voice echoing back. That creeping unease returned. I closed the door and went straight back to my desk. Coffee in hand, I checked the time. Just past 2 a.m. I only had a few more hours to go, but now I couldn't relax. 10 minutes later, it happened again. That same creaking sound, but this time it was definitely on my floor. I got up fast, heart pounding. I opened the office door and looked into the hallway. That door across from me was wide open again. My stomach dropped. Something wasn't right. I didn't want to investigate further. I just wanted out. As I moved toward the stairwell, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. There, standing in the hallway near the open office, was a woman. Her hair was long and wild, and her eyes were unnaturally wide. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, like she wasn't fully there. I didn't hesitate. I ran for the stairs. I could hear her footsteps pounding behind me for a few seconds, then silence. I didn't stop until I reached the first floor. Once I felt safe, I called the police. The strange part? The entire building was locked tight. The main entrance was in full view of a camera, and I had a clear line of sight on the back door. Yet when the police arrived, they couldn't find anyone inside. No broken locks, no forced entry, no sign of her at all. For the next few weeks, the company brought in an overnight security guard, but I was still shaken. Every night, I felt like she might reappear, slipping in unnoticed, just like before. And since no one ever figured out who she was or how she got in, I still wonder what she wanted, or what might have happened if I hadn't run.
I was living with my brother in a tiny 2-bedroom house that was old and run down. The neighborhood wasn't great either, but we were saving up to leave. Thankfully, we did, just a few months after this happened. Back then, I worked overnight shifts at a hospital, and my brother worked mid-shifts at a grocery store, so we barely crossed paths except for the occasional hello or goodbye. It was my day off, and since I like to stick to my night schedule, I woke up around 8 p.m. and had something to eat. My brother got home not long after that. We chatted briefly, then he went to bed. I stayed in the living room watching Netflix. Everything was normal until a pair of headlights lit up the room through the front window. It looked like someone had pulled into our driveway. I got up and looked out. A car was parked behind mine, and the headlights were still on, which made it hard to see who was inside. Then came a knock at the door. That's when I knew something was off. It was pouring rain outside, and I couldn't think of any reason someone would be visiting this late during a storm. I peeked through the window near the door and saw a man standing just outside the porch, soaked from the rain. I didn't open it. I just stayed still and watched. After a couple minutes, the man walked back to the car and got in the passenger seat. Then they backed out of the driveway and left. Weird, but I assumed it was a mistake or someone looking for the wrong house. I sat back down and returned to my show. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up on the couch. The show was still running, so I guess I had only been out for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I sat up, took a sip of water, and that's when I heard it. The rain was really loud again, and when I looked toward the hallway, I saw the front door slightly open. My heart dropped. I ran to the door and stared at it. I was certain I had locked it earlier. My first thought was maybe my brother had gotten up and stepped outside, even though that wouldn't have made much sense. I quickly shut and locked it again, then called out for him. No answer. I climbed the stairs and looked down the hall. His bedroom door was wide open, which was unusual if he was asleep. As I got closer, I heard movement inside his room. More than one person. Before I could react, a man ran out, slamming into me and knocking me to the floor. Another one followed right after him, sprinting past me and heading for the stairs. I scrambled to my feet just as my brother stepped out of the room and told me to call the police. He ran after them while I dialed, still in shock. I followed behind as far as the front door. The two intruders had already taken off down the street, and my brother locked the door behind them. He explained that they had woken him up and threatened him with a knife to keep him quiet. He said they'd only been in the room for a minute or two before I woke up. When they heard me walking upstairs, they panicked and ran. We never found out why they were there or if it was random. It felt targeted, but there was no way to be sure. Maybe they thought the house was empty. Maybe they didn't notice me sleeping on the couch. Whatever the reason, we didn't stick around to find out. We moved out not long after, and nothing like that ever happened again.
I work as a groundskeeper at the town's cemetery. Despite what people think, the job usually isn't creepy. The only thing that ever feels off are the few old gravestones with bells beside them. They've been there for nearly 200 years. But most nights are slow. I follow my routine, and the worst interruptions are some local kids who run off the second they see me. Since this is the only cemetery for miles, it's a large place with rows of gravestones stretching out across the land. This happened one Thursday in the middle of summer. I arrived at 10 p.m. like usual and went into the small brick outpost. It's just one room with maintenance tools, security screens, and a small bathroom. I grabbed the gate key and walked down to the main entrance to lock it for the night. While I was there, I saw a man walking along the fence just beyond the gate. He was wearing a black hoodie and staying close to the edge. I stood there for a minute and watched him walk past the gate without stopping. Since he didn't do anything, I went back to the outpost and put the keys away. For the next 30 minutes, I stayed inside, going over some notes left by the daytime staff. At about 11, I grabbed the runner key and went to the shed to get the ATV. It's just a small vehicle with a basket on the back we use for yard work. I started doing rounds, checking gravestones for any damage, and picking up old flowers and items people had left behind. We do this every Thursday, so visitors have time to collect anything they want before the weekend. Most people leave their things behind, though. As I drove around, tossing flowers into the back, I noticed someone across the yard. I looked around to see if there was a group, but it was just one person. I started driving toward him. The runner makes a lot of noise, but the man didn't react. He just kept walking through the cemetery, eyes fixed ahead. Thinking he might be grieving, I pulled up next to him and spoke calmly. "Sorry, sir, the cemetery is closed until morning. I can give you a ride out." He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. I drove alongside him again, this time more direct. "You need to leave now, or the police will be called for trespassing." He stopped. He turned to face me with wide red eyes and a strange smile. It wasn't happy. It looked more like pain or sadness. We stared at each other for a moment before he lunged. He hit the side of the ATV as I slammed the gas and took off before he could grab me. I sped straight to the outpost and called for help on the radio. I parked the runner outside and went inside the building to watch the security screens while updating the dispatcher. The police station isn't far, so I just had to wait a few minutes. But before I could spot him on the cameras, loud banging hit the door. The entire building shook with every hit. He was slamming into it again and again, hard enough that I felt the floor move. There was nothing in the room to defend myself with. I just watched the door shake and prayed it would hold. The dispatcher told me officers were almost there. About 10 seconds later, the banging stopped. I heard footsteps running away. I jumped back to the screens and scanned the cameras. I caught him sprinting toward the edge of the property. When the officers pulled in, I pointed them in the direction he ran, but they didn't follow him. He had gone into a wooded area, and they didn't know what they'd be walking into. We filed a report and reviewed the footage, but nothing came of it. Weeks passed, and the man was never identified. I still don't know who he was. Maybe he had just lost someone and wasn't thinking straight, or maybe it was something else entirely. I doubt I'll ever know.
When I was 19, I drove for Uber. I wasn't in school yet and had no real directions, so it was just a way to cover my bills while I figured things out. I usually worked from 7 at night until around 3 in the morning. Most drivers weren't active during those hours, but I liked the quiet and was more of a night person anyway. Around 11 one night, I picked up a woman from a bar and drove her about 35 minutes out to her house. Her place was at the far edge of the city, where it got much quieter and more rural. Right after dropping her off, I got another ride request about 10 minutes away. I hesitated because it wasn't heading back toward the city, it was even further out. Still, I accepted it, hoping the next rider would eventually lead me back toward more work. I followed the directions and ended up on a lonely road surrounded by farmland. There weren't any other cars around. After a few more turns, I came to a narrow dirt road running between 2 fields of tall grass or wheat. At the far end sat an old farmhouse on a small hill. According to the app, that was the pickup location. I parked on the grass in front of the house. There were no lights on and no one was outside. I waited a few seconds, then gave a light honk. The wind was pushing through the fields, and it was louder than I expected with my windows down. Because of that, I didn't hear the man walk up behind me until he tapped on the passenger door. It made me jump. I hadn't thought to check behind me, assuming he'd come from the house. He leaned into the open window without saying a word. His face was stiff and expressionless. After a few seconds of silence, I asked if he was the one who ordered the ride. He glanced into the back seat, scanned it for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Can you help me carry something to the car?" he asked. I was in work mode, so I just said sure without even thinking. I assumed it was a bag or some luggage, but I regretted that answer right away. He turned and started walking toward the house, and I followed behind at a short distance.
When he reached the porch, he opened the door and stepped inside quickly without looking back. I climbed the porch steps and looked through the doorway. The house was completely dark inside. I didn't see him anymore. The hallway ahead was empty and no lights were on. I couldn't even hear him moving around. I stood there for a moment, uneasy. "Sir," I called. Nothing. The house stayed silent. No footsteps, no voices, just still darkness beyond the open door. Something about it didn't feel right. It was too quiet, too strange. I stepped back, turned around, and went straight to my car. I drove fast through the field and back to the main road. Then I canceled the ride. Looking back, my biggest regret is that I didn't report it. Since nothing actually happened, I convinced myself there was no reason to call the police. But every time I think about it, it seems more likely that something awful was going on. A month later, I looked up the property out of curiosity. All I could find was that the house was last sold in the 1960s. That man probably didn't live there. He might not have had any connection to the house at all. What would have happened if I stepped through that door and followed him in is something I'll never know. And maybe that's for the best.
I work at a small retail store, and to be honest, I can't stand it. The job, the customers, even some of the people I work with, it's all a mess. But it's my first job, and with no experience, it was the only one I could get. During winter break, school let out for 3 weeks, so I finally had the chance to pick up some overnight shifts instead of just closings. I talked to my manager, who said it was fine. Overnight shifts were quieter, and I figured I wouldn't have to deal with customers or noise. Just get my tasks done at my own pace. Sounded like a win. The overnight manager, Chris, was already familiar to me, and when I came in for my first night shift, he showed me what needed to be done and left me to it. We were the only two in the building, working on opposite ends of the store. It was nice at first, peaceful. I had music playing in one ear, and the silence felt relaxing. But after a couple of hours, it started to drag. The store was too quiet, and the isolation started to settle in. Around 1 a.m., I texted Chris to let him know I was stepping out for my 15-minute break. I grabbed my lunch from the fridge and headed to my car. As I sat there eating, I planned to take a quick nap before going back in. But just before I closed my eyes, something caught my attention. A man was standing near the side of the building. The parking lot was pitch black except for the store lights glowing through the windows. No other cars, no reason for anyone to be out there. The man didn't move. He was staring into the windows like he was trying to see inside. He looked tall, wore a dark leather jacket and worn-out boots. His short hair and the way he stood gave me a weird feeling, so I stayed awake and kept watching. He didn't budge the whole time, just stood there. When my break ended, I got out of the car and tried to make my way back without attracting attention. I walked quickly across the lot, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But before I got close to the door, he turned and locked eyes with me. His face was blank, and his eyes looked cold and hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't stop. I rushed to the entrance, unlocked it fast, and slipped inside. He called out to me right as I shut the door, but I ignored him. Something in my gut told me not to engage. I locked up behind me and headed straight to the back to use the bathroom, then got back to work like normal. A few minutes passed, and I couldn't shake the thought of him. I walked back to the front of the store to check if he was still outside, but the man was gone. The parking lot was empty again. I figured maybe he'd finally left. I returned to my aisle and kept working. It was around 1:30 when a loud alarm suddenly echoed through the building. I knew right away what it was. The rear door in the storage area had been opened. That alarm sometimes went off when managers took out trash late and forgot to disarm the system, but with only Chris and me in the building, that didn't make sense.
I started walking toward the back. The closer I got to the storage room, the worse my nerves got. If it had been Chris, he would have already shut the alarm off. Then I reached the hallway leading to the door and heard loud thuds coming from the other side. I pushed the door open. The sound stopped. Down the hallway, I saw the back door standing wide open. No sign of Chris. The silence was tense. I called out his name, but there was no answer. A second later, a head slowly peeked around the far corner of the hallway. I recognized that face instantly. The same cold, lifeless stare from earlier. It was the man from outside. My body locked up for a moment, but I forced myself to move. I turned around and ran straight through the store and out to my car. Once I got inside, I called 911, realizing I still didn't know where Chris was or if he was okay. Police arrived fast. They swept the building and thankfully found Chris hiding in the manager's office. He told them the man had broken in and chased him. The pounding noises I heard were the guy trying to break down the locked office door. As soon as I ran outside, the man took off. They couldn't catch him. We got a blurry image from one of the security cameras, and now it's printed and pinned on the wall in the back office so everyone can keep an eye out. So far, he hasn't come back. No one knows what he was after or why he chose that night. All I know is I'm glad I trusted my instincts. Had I stopped to talk to him, things might have gone very differently.
A few years back, I was bouncing between jobs, just trying to make ends meet. Eventually, I landed a position as a night security guard at a massive warehouse. From the start, it was obvious the company had never had security before. They gave me a basic rundown, walk the perimeter, keep an eye on things, and make sure nobody broke in. A few days in, one of the warehouse workers let it slip that there had been some recent break-ins. That was the real reason they suddenly decided to hire security. I probably should have been more concerned, but honestly, I figured the building was just a target because it was empty at night. Now that someone was watching it, maybe that would be enough to scare people off. For the first 2 months, things were dead quiet. Not a single issue. No activity on the cameras, no signs of trespassing. I was basically getting paid to drink coffee and take a walk every few hours. Easiest money I'd ever made. Then one night, everything changed. I clocked in at 11 p.m. like usual. I made sure everyone had cleared out, locked up the building, and headed to the small security room to monitor the feeds. As I was checking the camera system, I noticed something weird. An alert showed that one of the doors wasn't locked properly. That didn't make sense. I had just locked every single one myself. I left the office and crossed the warehouse, heading for the flagged door. It was shut, and the lock looked fine at first. But when I gave it a couple tugs, it swung right open. That definitely wasn't right. I looked outside. Nothing but empty fields. No cars, no people, just silence and darkness. I turned back to the door and started inspecting it more closely. The bolt seemed okay, so I checked the latch on the frame. That's when I saw it. Jammed inside the bolt hole was a small piece of wood, wedged in such a way that the lock couldn't fully engage. It was intentional, no doubt about it. Someone had done this recently. I yanked the wood out and made sure the door was locked properly this time. The moment I turned to head back, a cold feeling crept in. Something was off. The warehouse suddenly felt much darker, much quieter. I thought again about those break-ins and how they never caught who did it. As I neared the office, I passed one of the tall racks filled with pallets and boxes. I caught a glimpse of something move. I stopped. In the corner of my eye, behind one of the shelves, I saw a head duck back quickly, like someone was hiding and had just realized I was looking. I didn't react. I just kept walking, trying to act like I hadn't seen anything. The moment I stepped into the office, I slammed the door shut and locked it.
My hands were shaking as I grabbed the phone and called the police. I tried to sound calm, but my voice was barely steady. Then I turned to the monitors. I flipped through each live feed until I landed on the hallway near my location. My heart nearly stopped. There he was, a man standing right outside the office door. The footage was grainy, but I could see enough to know he had something in his hand, maybe a large knife or a gun. He didn't move, just stood there, like he was waiting for something. I sat frozen, convinced he might try to break in at any moment. But after what felt like an hour, he finally backed away. I followed him on the cameras. He returned to the same door I had fixed, opened it, and slipped out into the field. Then he ran off into the night. The police arrived soon after. They swept the building, reviewed the footage, and launched an investigation along with the company. But they never found him. No fingerprints, no clues, nothing. It didn't take me long after that to quit. I found a new job, something quiet and far less terrifying. To this day, I still wonder what that man wanted. Maybe he was just there to steal something, or maybe he had planned something far worse.
Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.